There is a secret alien jellyfish invasion happening in Bikini Bottom. Mr. Krabs has been replaced by a fake imaginary doppelganger. Larry the Lobster is secretly a Bikini Bottom drug lord kingpin, and many more mind-blowing reveals in these 8 final SpongeBob Mini Theories. I originally posted these theories as a part of my giant 4-hour-long final SpongeBob Conspiracy compilation, but some people said it was kind of annoying to skip through the old content just to find the new theories, so I'm reposting just the mini theories here for your convenience. And also to milk these theories for every cent I can.
Hello! I like money!
I worked hard on these mini theories, I think I deserve that. And hey, after you're done, still go check out that compilation because the old theories have a ton of new content in them too. Please enjoy the final SpongeBob theories I will ever post, and stick around till the end to hear what other shows and movies I will be covering next. Thank you, let's begin. So, here's a question I've been asked from the very start of making these SpongeBob theories. How is there fire underwater? It's probably one of the most obvious contradictions in this show, and the creators will usually go out of their way to draw attention to the fact that it doesn't make any sense.
At least it's warm around the fire.
Hey, if we're underwater, how could there be a...
Whoever sent this obviously has no idea about the physical limitations of life underwater. Might as well throw these in the fire.
So finally, I will give the people my answer to this infamous age-old question, how is there fire underwater? It's just a cartoon. I'm not kidding, that's actually my answer. SpongeBob is not the real world. It's a cartoon. It has its own cartoon logic where absurd things like fire being underwater can happen. But that doesn't mean there's nothing here to theorize about. Just because it's cartoon logic doesn't mean it's not still logic. If you pay close attention, you can see that there is a consistent internal logic and rules to how this cartoon world really works. And I think how SpongeBob cartoon logic works is best explained in the Season 3 episode, Idiot Box. In this episode, SpongeBob and Patrick spend the day playing inside of a box, but Squidward keeps hearing impossible sound effects coming from it.
SpongeBob?
And how are they creating these sound effects?
How are you two making those noises?
Imagination.
With their imagination. And this is key to understanding how the SpongeBob world really works. This episode tells us that anything that is imagined in SpongeBob can physically come to life. We can see this imagination rule in every single episode of the show. The most obvious example of this is when a character is thinking and a thought bubble appears above their head. But in SpongeBob, these thought bubbles are real physical things. Other characters can see and physically interact with them.
Wait, hold on!
My pen is out of ink.
Plankton! You'll never get me formula, not even in a flashback.
Because things imagined in SpongeBob come to life. And this goes far beyond just thought bubbles. It explains how characters are constantly getting new props and costumes out of nowhere. Where did SpongeBob suddenly get this hat and sign? Where did he get this glove or all of these costumes that instantly appear and disappear? It's because SpongeBob is imagining all of these props. This can be used to explain almost every single absurd gag in this show.
Wait, Patrick, you're supposed to let me win, remember?
Oh yeah?
Patrick is imagining himself getting beat up here.
Said it's gonna be a good one, just wait and see.
SpongeBob is imagining the sun talking to him and burning his bedroom, and SpongeBob and Patrick are imagining that fire is able to exist underwater. And if you still don't believe me, look what happens when Patrick questions the logic behind the fire.
Hey, if we're underwater, how could there be a...
The moment they start doubting the logic of the fire, it disappears because they're no longer able to imagine it. This rule also seems to be limited by how imaginative each character is. Squidward, who never even got the idiot box to work, rarely ever manifests any imaginations, while SpongeBob, arguably the most imaginative character in the show, has created living characters like Doodle Bob and Bubble Buddy using his imagination, both of which have ended up continually reappearing throughout the entire show. Bubble Buddy even went on to create an entire bubble town full of bubble citizens, all stemming from SpongeBob's imagination. This theory also explains why Mrs. Puff gets trapped in so many delusions. They are literally manifesting around her because of her imagination. Okay, but what's the point of explaining all of this? Even if you didn't know the exact mechanics of it, you probably already understood that random stuff can just appear and disappear in a cartoon. I'm not really telling you anything groundbreaking. But once you fully understand this idea, it adds a whole new context to so many things in this show. One of the most interesting being how dreams seem to affect the world, specifically SpongeBob's dreams. In Season 1 Sleepy Time, SpongeBob dreams about finally getting his license, but then he crashes and Mrs. Puff takes his license away. And this is exactly what happens later in the Season 2 episode, No Free Rides. Mrs. Puff gives him a license, instantly regrets it, and after SpongeBob crashes his car, Mrs. Puff takes his license away. So, did SpongeBob's dream predict this event? Or did his imagination literally cause it to happen? Okay, you're not convinced yet? Don't worry. This is far from the only instance of this happening. In Season 2 Procrastination, SpongeBob dreams about his pineapple burning down, which happens later in Season 9 Gary's New Toy. In Season 5 Roller Cowards, he dreams about crashing on a Glove World roller coaster, and then it happens in Season 10 Don't Wake Patrick. Even dreams we don't see come true. In Squids on a Bus, Squidward becomes a bus driver for the day, and SpongeBob says this.
I've always dreamed one day I'd board a bus and see you driving it.
Now, I already know what you're gonna say. SpongeBob's a very long-running show. A lot of these basic plots were bound to happen eventually, right? You know, it's like how The Simpsons can predict the future. But in Season 4's Fear of Krabby Patties, SpongeBob dreams about everyone in the Krusty Krab turning into giant killer Krabby Patties. That is a very weird and specific plot, and yet that's still exactly what happens 7 seasons later in Krabby Patty Creature Feature, when Mr. Krabs feeds people experimental Krabby Patties and turns everyone into giant mutant Krabby Patty monsters that try to hunt SpongeBob down. It seems like all of SpongeBob's dreams eventually manifest into real life because of the unlimited power of his imagination. Okay, that's all pretty interesting, right? But you wanna know something really crazy? While researching this theory, I discovered something insane. Honestly, it may be one of the craziest discoveries I've ever found in this show. Are you ready? In the Season 6 special, Truth or Square, all of the characters get trapped inside of the massive ventilation system beneath the Krusty Krab.
There's an entire network of tunnels and air ducts underground.
At a certain point, Mr. Krabs gets separated from the group.
A crossroads. I'll go this way, and SpongeBob, you lead him down that way.
SpongeBob then takes a break to tell the story of when Mr. Krabs told him the Krabby Patty secret formula.
This reminds me of the time Mr. Krabs confided in me the Krabby Patty recipe. Mr. Krabs called me into his office.
And then something really strange happens. After the story, we cut back to the group, and Mr. Krabs is somehow back with them after previously being separated. I'm serious, there's no scene of them being reunited. He's just gone and then back somehow, and it's never explained in this episode. I mean, what was even the point of wasting time and money animating them split up if they were just gonna immediately bring Mr. Krabs back without any explanation?
I'll go this way, and SpongeBob, you lead him down that way.
You could literally remove the scene of Mr. Krabs separating from them, and the episode would make total sense. But wait a second. Look at how SpongeBob's story ends.
You can never tell another living soul.
Wait, hold on!
Plankton! You'll never get me formula, not even in a flashback.
SpongeBob.
Imaginary Mr. Krabs from inside of the thought bubble grabs Plankton and throws him down a vent. And when we cut back, Mr. Krabs is suddenly back sitting with the group. The obvious explanation is that this isn't the real Mr. Krabs. This is still the imaginary Krabs from SpongeBob's story who came to life. And the real Mr. Krabs is still somewhere lost inside of the Krusty Krab vents, and they never switched back. The Mr. Krabs they escape with is not the real Mr. Krabs. And every time we see Mr. Krabs after this season 6 episode, he's actually a fake imaginary doppelganger, and the real one is still trapped beneath the Krusty Krab somewhere. It's the reason why Mr. Krabs in later seasons has become such a one-dimensional character, going from someone who was cheap but still genuinely cared about his employees and family to a one-note cartoon villain. It's because he actually was replaced by a flat, imaginary imitation of the original. And I know what you're gonna say, there's no way SpongeBob would imagine him to be that way. Well, think again.
Show me what you got.
Look at me. I'm Mr. Krabs. I love money. Every night I tuck me wallet in and tell it a bedtime story. Ooh, what's that you say? Me daughter Pearl needs an operation? I'll do it myself and save a nickel.
That'll do, SpongeBob.
And that is the imagination theory. 7 more mini theories left. Woo!
Spooky, scary skeletons and shivers down your spine.
Just a heads up, some of these new mini theories kind of build off of my old SpongeBob conspiracies. So if you've never seen my television theory, I recommend watching that first. So, there's this viral image that's gone around the internet that points out a really funny detail about this show. There seems to be a frightening number of miniature dead human skeletons in SpongeBob. And it's a really funny observation, but it's also really strange because why are there a bunch of mini dead human skeletons in SpongeBob? Like, the animators already have a generic design for a fish skeleton. Why are they going out of their way to make these human skeletons? They're obviously much more detailed and harder to draw. And this is something we see in both early and modern SpongeBob. Well, I think the television theory actually provides a pretty good explanation for this. We know there's tons of human scuba divers secretly filming the show, and it even looks like some of them are fish-sized, and we know there is shrinking technology in this show, so like I've already said, I think it's fair to assume that humans shrunk themselves down to better film these characters undetected, which explains why we see so many tiny human skeletons. They're the crew members who sadly passed away during the filming of SpongeBob. They are deep underwater after all, it's not the safest place for humans to be. And that's about all I had to say about this topic. It's not actually that interesting. I probably wouldn't have even bothered making this separate mini theory if it wasn't for a very interesting piece of SpongeBob history that was recently made public. The original SpongeBob Pitch Bible, the document created by Steven Hillenburg in 1997 to pitch the show to Nickelodeon, was just recently finally made available to the public. And it is full of fascinating early ideas and concept art for the show. But what's interesting to me is that much like the show itself, the Pitch Bible is presented like a fictional in-universe report from a team of deep-sea divers discovering Bikini Bottom for the first time. An afternoon ascent into the deep crystalline gulf, which plummets from the island's coral base, revealed the natural wonder which had so long eluded the eyes of mankind. We had indeed found SpongeBoy, which was the original name for SpongeBob. There before us, glistening in the glow of our dive lamps, sat a submerged treasure unlike any other in the world. We were afforded a first-hand glimpse into the character of SpongeBoy and his world. It's crazy that even the pitch Bible for this show has lore. If this doesn't prove the television theory, I don't know what does. But there's something in this Bible that I always thought was a little strange. On page 12, there's a dedication section. It describes one of the first expeditions to Bikini Bottom taken by a deep-sea diver named Bucky Leavitt, using a new and untested diving suit, which ultimately imploded from the undersea pressures. Bucky died, making the only known map of Bikini Bottom. It is to Bucky and his pioneer spirit that we dedicate this research. It's kind of a strange thing to include in a pitch for a kid's show, of all things. The story seems to be inspired by Benjamin Leavitt, the inventor of the suit shown in this photo, but there's no record of him ever dying during an expedition. So it seems like this story about Bucky was completely made up just to add more lore to the show. So it then begs the question, if he is a character in this universe, where is Bucky's body? Could he possibly be one of the human skeletons we've seen throughout the show? Well, we know Bucky died in his old prototype diving suit, so I think his body would probably still be inside of it. So the real question is, do we know of any diving suits in Bikini Bottom? And yes, we do. We see it almost every episode. SpongeBob's television. SpongeBob's TV is clearly supposed to be an old diving suit helmet, but it's strange because it's so small compared to diving suits we've seen worn by other humans. So either this diving suit is from a shrunken human, or it's been compressed down to a smaller size by the pressures of the sea, just like Bucky's. We even see SpongeBob's TV design was a part of the original pitch Bible. I think there's a very good chance that this is supposed to be at least the head of Bucky Leavitt. I think every time SpongeBob is watching TV, he's actually staring directly at a dead human skull. And if you don't believe me, in Season 10's Whirly Brain, SpongeBob and Patrick fight over the TV and actually pull it apart. And for the very first time ever, we get a look inside. It's an extremely fast moment, but if you go frame by frame, you'll see that inside of SpongeBob's TV is what looks like a human skull. And that is Skeleton Theory. Rest in peace, Bucky. This is the only mini theory that's just like a straight up part 2 of one of my old theories. So obviously, if you haven't seen the original Mrs. Puff theory yet, then it probably won't make too much sense. So, there's been a lot of new evidence that's come out about Mrs. Puff since I posted my theory. Some I already added to the main theory, like her real name being discovered, so go watch that if you haven't already. But I saved some really cool discoveries and new ideas just for this mini theory. Like, in Lighthouse Louie, I missed this the first time, but if you look closely in her pile of junk, you can actually see a dead police officer's corpse! Oh my god! Ah! Ah! Actually, no, this is just an obstacle from her training course. But I bet you didn't know, in Camp Coral, we see her dispose of the real Mrs. Puff's dead body! Also no, this is just a piñata that looks like her. Okay, but they're clearly trying to mess with us at this point. I want to talk about some alternative ideas I've come up with for some parts of the Mrs. Puff theory. As I've already said, I'm not the biggest fan of where I took the third part of this theory. I really wanted there to be this big reveal about why the prison is forcing Mrs. Puff to teach SpongeBob, when in reality, it just makes so much more sense that, like in Doing Time, every time Mrs. Puff sees SpongeBob in jail, she's actually just hallucinating.
Good day, class! I must be having a nightmare!
You know, there's just way more direct evidence in the show to support this, as opposed to this convoluted warden theory. And it's further supported by my new imagination mini theory from earlier in this video. We know the show exists in a world where things you imagine can easily come to life. And Mrs. Puff is constantly imagining her fear of SpongeBob or the guilt from her past mistakes. So it makes sense that she would get trapped in her own delusions so often. But there's always been this big loose end in my theory that I've always wanted to find a way to wrap up. We know Mrs. Puff prematurely gave a license to one of her previous students in New Kelp City, and that led to the city being destroyed.
Local consensus places the blame on this negligent, selfish driving instructor.
But who was Mrs. Puff's original student before SpongeBob? And while we haven't gotten any new evidence about this, I think I've got 2 strong candidates for who it could be. One of the best comments I got from the Mrs. Puff video was the idea that the original student was actually SpongeBob's cousin, Stanley S. Squarepants.
Hi, Squidward! I'd like you to meet my cousin Stanley. We're related.
There's 2 of them?
Stanley is a character we meet for only 1 episode in Season 5. He's SpongeBob's cousin from out of town, and he's extremely accident-prone, even more than SpongeBob. Now, we don't know what town he's from, but we know his Uncle Sherm sent him away because he was too destructive. So he totally fits the idea of Mrs. Puff's former student that probably destroyed New Kelp City. It would also add another layer to why Mrs. Puff is so tortured by SpongeBob specifically. He would literally look and act exactly like her former student.
There's 2 of them?
So yeah, I think this is totally plausible. Great comment. The only thing that kind of holds this theory back is the lack of any actual concrete connection between Stanley and Mrs. Puff. Like, unfortunately, they're never in the same episode. But I think I have another possible candidate for this mystery student. Someone who we actually see interact with Mrs. Puff. In the Mrs. Puff theory, I theorized that the entire episode Doing Time was all imagined by Mrs. Puff, and everything we see, even small details like her changing prison uniforms, are symbolic for what's really going on inside of her head. But if that's true, then what does this random other prisoner that keeps showing up symbolize?
Hey there, Puff Mama. What's today's grub?
Hi, Donna. It's Chili.
I wouldn't have thought much about it if it wasn't for this very interesting moment where she returns at the end of the episode.
Oh, it's just my imagination again.
So what's for dinner tonight, Puff Mama? Chili?
I think this could be implying that Donna is Mrs. Puff's original student. We see her driving Mrs. Puff's boat in a free-fall crash, just like her old student probably also did. And then she literally gets replaced by SpongeBob.
So what's for dinner tonight, Puff Mama? Chili?
Forget it.
Just like how he actually replaced her original student. So yeah, I think both Donna and Stanley are pretty good candidates for the original student. Stanley is a bit more thematically fitting, but Donna actually has some direct evidence in the show. So yeah, I could see it being either of them. And that is the Mrs. Puff Theory Part 2.
Incredibly excited because we get to talk to the voice of Karen today, Jill Talley.
I love trying to make sense out of SpongeBob. My adorable nephew called me up and he just was like, hey, Jill, do you know about this? What do you make of this? Like, what do you think about this Mrs. Puff? And I didn't know what he was talking about. It was like a fever dream because I wasn't aware of all the conspiracy stuff. So all I'm hearing on the phone is criminal, past clues. And I'm going, what is he talking about? I said, I'm going to look into it, Frankie. So then I went online and I started looking at it and it was fascinating.
Yeah.
I was going, I want to know too.
Okay, this next part isn't actually a new mini theory. It's actually just me debunking the popular Krabby Patty is crab meat theory that people keep commenting about, just because it annoys me. But don't worry, there's still gonna be 8 new actual theories in this video. This is just a little bonus.
It's crab meat.
Actual crab? I mean, why else would Mr. Krabs be the only crab in Bikini Bottom? Except for his mom, and his dad, and his nephews. Okay, but there's no crabs outside of his family, except for this guy, and this doctor, and this kid, and these 2 crabs, and this circus guy. But besides them, there's no crabs in Bikini Bottom. Okay, even if there is not, like, a lot of crabs, there's equally not a lot of sponges, or starfish, or pufferfish, or squirrels in Bikini Bottom. Bikini Bottom is like 90% generic fish. But then why is it named the Krusty Krab? Cause the owner's a crab, and that's his last name. But even if we ignore that, it's like, why would Mr. Krabs advertise his dark secret as the name of his restaurant? But then why is the Krusty Krab shaped like a crab trap? Okay, this is actually the one good piece of evidence in this theory. I think it's a little ambiguous whether it's supposed to be a crab trap or a lobster trap, so I did some digging, and Patchy actually calls it a lobster trap in a SpongeBob DVD bonus.
The Krusty Krab looks like a New England-style lobster trap, but now it just traps the pocket change of Bikini Bottom's hungry denizens.
They also find a very similar-looking building in Camp Coral and call it a lobster trap.
Oh no! We've walked into a real life lobster trap!
I could maybe see this evidence kind of working, but you'd kind of expect if this was their secret intention, they would like call it a crab trap, you know? But what about the scene where Mr. Krab eats one and he says that it tastes like him?
So that's what I taste like.
This is supposed to be the smoking gun piece of evidence that's all over TikTok, but nobody actually shows the clip with context.
Mommy, my Krabby Patty tastes funny.
Well, no wonder. It's all old and dried out, like that man right there. Now put that thing where it belongs, in the garbage.
La 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 la.
Well, little Patty, we're 2 of a kind. We've both lost our luster. So that's what I taste.
So, if there's one thing I'd probably change about my evolution theory, it would be the second part about the war.
After the war, crabs stayed secluded in a deep depression that seemed endless.
I think there definitely was a war in Bikini Bottom, but I don't think it was between evolved and primitive fish anymore. There is just way more evidence that the war Mr. Krabs fought in was actually a war between fish and humans. And I think this concept for a human war has been secretly present in the show from the very start. Every single building in Bikini Bottom is made out of some sort of debris from the human world. Now, this is a reference to how marine ecosystems in real life often form around things that fell from the surface. But the debris isn't always just random objects or pollution. A surprising amount of the buildings feel like they're from the aftermath of a massive war. There are a ton of buildings made out of sunken ships, but there's also anchors, submarines, lobster traps, bait and tackle boxes, undersea mines. There's even a building made out of a dead bucket of fish. If you really look at the show's aesthetic, it gives the impression that Bikini Bottom is an Adventure Time style post-apocalyptic wasteland where a massive war between humans and fish took place. Mr. Krabs' Navy Convention Center is literally a giant torpedo. We get further confirmation of this as early as Season 1 Hooky, when a bunch of humans start fishing in Bikini Bottom. Pay close attention to how Mr. Krabs reacts.
They're back! They're back, I tell you! I saw them with my own eyes!
They're back. Mr. Krabs has dealt with this before, probably because these were the same hooks from the war he fought in. We also see giant hooks all over Mr. Krabs' wall of memorabilia, along with other human fishing tools. There's even a picture of the Bikini Bottom museum ship before it was sunk in the war and later turned into a museum. There's also this picture of a human pirate. And before you say anything, no, this is not Patchy. It's probably just someone he fought in the war. Listen, I still definitely think these pictures could be Pearl's mother, and she's still the source of the Krabby Patty meat, but instead of Mr. Krabs killing her, she was probably just a casualty of the human war, and Mr. Krabs just found her dead body and adopted her orphan daughter. There's also the Hook Museum, which with this context looks much more just like a straight up war museum. Now, these are smaller hooks, so I initially thought maybe this was just a museum of hooks made by evolved fish to catch primitive fish like clams, but listen closely to the audio Mr. Krabs is listening to.
The three-pronged jig hook was first sighted in local waters more than 100 years ago.
The hook was first sighted in local waters more than 100 years ago. This is definitely a museum of human hooks. There's also tons of movies and TV shows in Bikini Bottom based around the horrors of hooks.
Tonight's frightening feature.
The idea of this human war is everywhere in the show, and it's played a big role in shaping the culture of Bikini Bottom. But here's the strange thing about all of this. The Bikini Bottom we see today is not at war. The only time we see humans fishing in Bikini Bottom is in this one single episode, and Mr. Krabs even says they're back.
They're back!
As if this is not a normal occurrence. This implies that the humans previously stopped attacking for some reason. So what ended this great human war that lasted for at least 100 years? Well, clearly humans and fish have a much more peaceful relationship now. The entire SpongeBob SquarePants show is made by humans with the help of certain fish, including Mr. Krabs, who used to fight against them. What if the reason why the war ended was because of this show? The original human research team that was mentioned in the SpongeBob Pitch Bible showed the world that Bikini Bottom had extremely intelligent life and proved that instead of killing the fish, they could peacefully profit off of them by making their lives into a TV show. SpongeBob doesn't even know it, but I think he might be the reason why a 100-year-long brutal war between humans and fish has come to a peaceful end. And that is the human war theory. So, in 2021, Nickelodeon released a new spin-off show all about Patrick, called The Patrick Star Show.
Hi! I'm Patrick Star, and I live with my parents! This is my dad! This is my mom! This is my sister! This is my grandpa! And this is my show!
And I was really interested in it because it seems to kind of acknowledge the fact that it is a TV show, with Patrick actually being filmed and putting on a show as part of the plot of each episode.
Coming to you from the Star Family home, it's time for the Patrick Show! And here's your wide-awake host,
But it's weird. It's supposed to be a prequel when Patrick was still living with his family, but the Patrick's parents and sister characters that were established in the main show have been replaced by completely different people in this spin-off. This has been a long-running mystery about the Patrick Star Show that many people have asked me to talk about, but a storyboard artist for the Patrick Star Show actually addressed these contradictions in a very funny Twitter thread where he offers many different possible explanations for why Patrick's family looks different. These range from Patrick just perceiving reality differently, to him just assuming whatever starfish is closest to him is his family, to some kind of crazy timeline manipulation. But my favorite is just that they were recast by the in-universe showrunners and Patrick's too dumb to notice. Also, casual television theory confirmation, no biggie, we're used to it at this point. Now, I watched a good amount of this show when it was first coming out, and there wasn't really too much here for me to analyze, except for one very interesting character. GrandPat, and it ties directly in with my Neptune theory. GrandPat is allegedly Patrick's grandfather, even though we've never heard about him until now.
Mom, Dad,
Who's this guy?
I'm your grandfather, GrandPat. Must we do this every morning?
He's sort of a generic, cranky old man character who's apparently somehow been alive since prehistoric times.
Back in my day, we were food. It was way back in the Patrolithic period of early cave stars.
But he's not really that notable or interesting of a character, or that's at least what I thought, until I noticed something strange in the episode Squidina's Little Helper.
Sounds like we're doing a puppet show. Follow me. The secret crawl space runs all over the house.
As characters move through a crawl space in Patrick's house, one of them briefly opens the door and finds a weird secret room full of Roman architecture with GrandPat inside.
Who's a hungry boy? Dig in so you can grow up big and bristly.
The puppets are this way.
It's kind of a weird throwaway gag, but there's not really much to it, and they immediately move on with the episode without ever addressing it again. But something about this tiny, insignificant moment really stuck with me, even months after watching this episode. And when I watched it again, I couldn't help but notice that the door leading to the room is labeled XIV. The Roman numerals for 14 for seemingly no reason. Is this supposed to be the 14th room in the house or what? But then I remembered we've heard the number 14 before in the season 4 episode, Krusty Towers.
This room is hideous. Redesign it. Neptune the 14th will be nice.
What?
King Neptune is also referred to as the 14th. Is it possible that there's some sort of connection between GrandPat and King Neptune? I mean, that's even the way you would write a king's ordinal number, with the Roman numerals XIV. Also, the room is full of fancy royal Roman architecture, and the way GrandPat is relaxing and eating grapes like a king. Hear me out, hear me out. Is it possible GrandPat is King Neptune? We know Neptune has the power to change the way people look.
What the?
And it would explain why GrandPat, just a normal sea star, is able to be alive as far back as prehistoric times. He even has a prehistoric drawing of a starfish wearing a crown in his bedroom. This could even explain why they thought Patrick was a descendant of royalty in Rule of Dumb.
Which makes you a descendant of royalty. You are a king.
But wait a second. Why would the King of the Sea be pretending to be Patrick's cranky old grandpa? Well, remember, the Patrick Star Show is a prequel to the main series, and if you believe my Neptune theory, then you know Neptune wasn't always the King of the Sea. It's likely at some point he stole the throne and Poseidon's wife. So, what if this takes place before Neptune became king?
When King Neptune was a little Neptune, his mother set him adrift in a river.
When he was all alone, abandoned by his own mother, desperate to find the family that he was denied his whole life. So, how would he get one? Well, it turns out that there just happens to be one family in the sea that's dumb enough not to notice when new family members are added or replaced. the Patrick Star family. So, he transforms himself into the cranky old grandfather character GrandPat and secretly inserts himself into the family without their knowledge.
Who's this guy?
I have no idea. Do you, Cecil?
So you can see him too, Bunny? I thought I was the only one.
I'm your grandfather, GrandPat. Must we do this every morning?
Finally giving him the family love he's been searching for his entire life.
GrandPat! We love you!
And if this all still sounds far-fetched to you, listen closely to the music we hear in this scene.
Who's a hungry boy? Dig in so you can grow up big and bristly.
This small piece of music is called Roman Legions, composed by John Kakavas, and it was used only one other time in SpongeBob.
Who's a hungry boy?
Behold Neptune, god of the sea, with his mighty trident.
In the Season 10 episode, Trident Trouble, when they are introducing none other than King Neptune the 14th. GrandPat is King Neptune. And that is the GrandPat Theory. Or, at least it was, until they released the episode Neptune's Ball, where we see King Neptune and GrandPat in the same room.
Man, I love your show!
And I'm really conflicted about this because yes, this obviously debunks my theory. Neptune and GrandPat can't be the same person if they're both in the same room. But then why does all of this evidence feel so specific and intentional? Like, most evidence I find can usually be explained as an Easter egg or a coincidence, but like, I can't think of any other reason why this random room would have the Roman numerals 14 on it. Maybe this was something they were setting up but changed their minds about, or maybe there's some sort of time travel shenanigans going on, because we know Patrick's family has a time machine in this show that they use all the time.
Egypt?
Or maybe I'm just in denial and I'm overthinking small little random details. Like I've said, these are the theories that didn't make the cut for their own videos, so they're not all gonna be as strong as my main theories. But even if it's unlikely, I'm still gonna hold out hope that maybe I'll be proven right someday. Oh well, on to the next theory. I noticed something really strange in the Season 3 episode As Seen on TV. In the beginning of this episode, we find out Mr. Krabs has hired Squidward to direct a Krusty Krab commercial.
We're shooting our first ever Krusty Krab commercial. I got Squidward organizing the whole thing. He's, you know, artsy. What the? This looks expensive.
But when he sees the production Squidward put on is way bigger than he would need for just a tiny commercial, he scraps the whole thing and shoots a lower budget one himself. But there is something very strange about the production Squidward was directing. Squidward's set has a second Krusty Krab, just like the SpongeBob movie.
Well, how do you explain that? A second Krusty Krab?
What inspired you to build a second Krusty Krab right next door to the original?
Okay, that's a weird coincidence, but whatever. But that's not all. Squidward's production also has the same giant leg with a heel and fishnet stockings that Patrick wears at the end of the SpongeBob movie.
That's right, keep moving!
Like, they're not exactly the same, but you gotta admit, this is starting to feel a little too specific to be a coincidence, right? Is it possible the production Squidward directed for the Krusty Krab commercial was actually the in-universe production for the SpongeBob SquarePants movie? This episode came out in 2002, which is the same year the real-life SpongeBob movie began production, and the similarities don't even end there. In the background, we can see a fish dressed with almost the exact same hat, red bandana, and boots as Dennis.
Mr. Krabs, everyone needs an understudy.
What if this is Dennis's understudy? We also see Mr. Krabs' understudy, who could be the stand-in for him while he's frozen for most of the movie. And then we see a guy in a giant tomato costume, and what I assume is another guy in a giant Krabby Patty costume. And I think they're supposed to be the Patty Wagon, and they're just doing some kind of visual effects that would require people to be in the suits. But regardless, there is an undeniable amount of similarities here. I think there is a very good chance that this is the actual in-universe SpongeBob movie production. But if that's all true, then why are they pretending like this is all just a commercial for the Krusty Krab?
We're making the commercial, Mr. Krabs.
Well, remember, in my television theory, most of the characters don't know they're inside of a semi-scripted TV show or movie. It's a big secret the showrunners are keeping from them, so obviously they would want to come up with some sort of cover story to keep this production a secret from the unaware characters like SpongeBob. Squidward even has SpongeBob bury himself in this episode to keep all the behind-the-scenes production a secret.
What are you doing, lad?
Squidward said I could help by burying myself.
So that means Squidward is not only a spy who's part of the television theory cover-up, but he's also the director of the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. And that is the Squidward director theory. Okay, so the actual most frequent comment I get on any of my videos is, "Where's the jellyfish theory?" And I get it. I tease this whole jellyfish alien invasion theory as sort of a misdirect in Don't Feed the Muse 2. This may be my darkest theory yet. This is the alien jellyfish invasion theory. The idea was that the plot of the theory was actually foreshadowing the plot of Don't Feed the Muse, but a lot of people still really wanted to see that theory, and I still get comments about it to this day, and for good reason. I was definitely clickbaiting you guys there. And to be completely honest, I only chose that topic because it lined up so well with the film I was making. I didn't actually have a theory planned for it, but now that I've really looked into it a bit more, I do think there's actually a surprising amount of things to say about this topic. I think it might actually be one of my best mini theories in this video. So finally, here is the long-awaited alien jellyfish invasion theory. Aliens have invaded Bikini Bottom and taken the form of jellyfish. One by one, they replace the citizens of Bikini Bottom with identical clones, slowly taking over the population from within. Throughout the entire show, there have been hints of these alien jellyfish secretly controlling people and pulling the strings from the shadows. This may be my darkest theory yet. This is the alien jellyfish invasion theory. One of the creepiest episodes of SpongeBob is, by far, the Season 8 episode, Planet of the Jellyfish. A mysterious green alien appears in jellyfish fields and starts spreading alien jellyfish clones all over Bikini Bottom. By getting the people to wear the alien jellyfish's hats, one by one they kidnap and replace the citizens of Bikini Bottom with identical clones. This whole episode is very much a parody of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers films. Eventually, SpongeBob discovers the weakness of the aliens is none other than mayonnaise, and he uses it to kill the aliens and set everyone free. But how free are they, really? Afterwards, Mr. Krabs decides to resell all the remaining alien goo as a new Krabby Patty condiment.
Freaky clone jelly relish!
Get your freaky clone jelly relish patties!
And the episode ends with Patrick ordering one of these patties, but without mayonnaise.
I'll have one relish patty. Hold the man.
We're left on this cliffhanger where Patrick might still very well be an alien clone. And that's it. It's been 11 years since this episode came out, and there has been no continuation of this story since then. So, is Patrick an alien? Are the Jellians still somehow around, secretly plotting another takeover? Well, before I answer that, I can actually tell you exactly where these aliens came from. The background of the title card for this episode shows a barren alien planet, but we've actually seen this exact planet before. In the Season 4 episode, SquidBob Tentacle Pants, Sandy is experimenting with a new teleportation device and accidentally sends SpongeBob and Squidward to an alien planet for a few seconds.
Well, here goes nothing.
The exact same alien planet we see in the Planet of the Jellyfish title card. Now, the aliens we see on this planet don't really resemble the Jellians, so at first I thought maybe the Jellians were originally just a different species somewhere else on this planet, but then I noticed in the background we see this orange and yellow ringed planet that isn't present in the Jellyfish title card. Planet of the Jellyfish is obviously a parody of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and in that franchise, the aliens invaded Earth because their original original home planet was dying. So what if this planet was the original homeworld of the Jellians, but just like an invasion of the Body Snatchers, the planet died sometime between SquidBob and Planet of the Jellyfish, and that's why the jellyfish invaded Earth. The spots on the planet even look like a jellyfish. Okay, so that's where I think the Jellians came from, but where are they now? Is Patrick actually an alien clone at the end of Planet of the Jellyfish? No, he's not. And not because I just claimed he was a robot. The Jellian clones all have black eyes and act in a very obviously alien way. And Patrick here looks and acts completely normal. But then why does he ask for a Krabby Patty without mayonnaise?
Hold him in.
Well, maybe it's as simple as he just doesn't like mayonnaise. Also no, and it's not because of this scene.
Is mayonnaise an instrument?
It's because of the way the season 4 episode Hocus Pocus ends. When SpongeBob somehow figures out how to perform real magic and Patrick asks SpongeBob to do this.
Hey SpongeBob, I'm still hungry. Will you turn me into a jar of mayonnaise so I can eat myself?
Patricka, mayonnaise-a-ga.
Patrick could have asked SpongeBob to turn him into literally any food, and he chose mayonnaise. Mayonnaise is his favorite fucking food, which means there is no way he would ask to hold the mayo at the end of Planet of the Jellyfish unless he was being controlled by the Jellians, at least to some extent. So even if he's not a full-on alien clone, I think he is being affected by the Jellian goo he ate, but in a much more subtle, dormant way. It's kind of like how rabies has evolved to make people afraid of water because the virus spreads faster without it. The Jellian goo is subconsciously making people avoid mayonnaise in order to keep itself alive. Now, there are little hints that maybe these Jellians are still around, influencing people in future episodes. Gary, Sandy, and even Patchy all mention later that they don't like mayonnaise.
Gary hates mayo.
I don't like mayonnaise neither.
Audie, you know I don't like mayo!
And there was this shaman guy in season 9 that had a jellyfish on his head. But, you know, other than these random one-off moments, that's kinda it. So maybe there is a secret jellyfish invasion going on, but like I said, I chose this theory because it fit the film I was making, not because there's any smoking gun evidence to prove it all. I mean, it's not like there's a whole convention of people wearing jellyfish hats, right? Oh, yeah, I forgot about these guys. So, in the Season 2 episode, I'm Your Biggest Fanatic, we're introduced to the biannual Jellyfish Convention, where all the jellyfish enthusiasts in Bikini Bottom can meet up and enjoy their hobby.
Wow, I can't believe it. We're actually here at the biannual Jellyfish Convention.
Jellyfish are awesome.
Now, there were people wearing jellyfish hats here before the Jellyfish Invasion episode, but it's maybe like 10% of the people. But 4 seasons after Planet of the Jellyfish, we get an episode called Jolly Lodgers where we see the convention again, and literally like 99% of the people there are wearing jellyfish hats now. Huh. I guess it just got a little more popular, you know, I guess it's not that weird. But not only does the convention seem a lot bigger, but there's some interesting new activities going on. We got increasing your sting endurance, get buff jellyfishing, do you want to be a jelly? Totally legal? Maybe that's just like a little suspicious. And just listen to the way these people talk now.
You belong with us now.
Okay, these guys are Jellians. They even surround Squidward in the exact same way the Jellians surrounded SpongeBob and Sandy. Look, the creators literally recreated the shot. I'm not crazy, these guys are fucking Jellians. And we even see people still wearing these jellyfish hats after the convention. In one of the newer episodes in season 14, we see a random fish wearing a jellyfish hat, even though he's not at or going to a jellyfish convention. But what's really strange here is that when Bubble Bass opens a window, everyone's stuff flies off except for this hat. It is really stuck on there. It really feels like there is some kind of alien clinging to his head. We also see Kevin's fan club, the Jelly Spotters, again in season 14, except now they've all got jellyfish hats, and they've replaced their leader, Kevin, with Patrick.
He got kicked out of the club years ago!
Which kind of makes sense since Kevin can't really wear a jellyfish hat since he's got that thing on his head.
I didn't know this was a hat.
It wasn't.
So they got someone else who the aliens could actually replace to be in charge. It makes sense. The Jellians are back, and they're using this convention to secretly add people to their alien hive mind collective. In fact, I'm even pretty sure that they successfully replaced Squidward in this episode. Throughout this episode, Squidward is trying to escape this convention, but they keep cornering him and even force him to wear a jellyfish hat. But then, at the end of this episode, he finds an empty jellyfish mascot costume and decides to use it as a disguise to escape.
Say, if I put that dumb thing on, I can sneak out of here without anybody knowing it's me.
And it pretty much works. He manages to get away from everyone else.
I've got peace and quiet. I've got peace and quiet.
But wait a second. Let's go back to the establishing shot at the very beginning of this episode. Do you notice anything strange here, other than the stuff I've already pointed out? Hidden in the bottom right corner is the jellyfish mascot Squidward will eventually put on. But if that's the case, then why can we already see Squidward's feet coming out of it? This is way before Squidward puts on the costume to escape. We literally see him outside of the costume in the very next shot. Squidward can't also be here unless they already made an alien clone of Squidward, and at some point during the episode, they switch places. Squidward and everyone here has been replaced by the alien jellyfish invasion. And also replaced by the robot invasion, and also brainwashed by Goofy Goobers, and also being secretly controlled by the showrunners. A lot of people are trying to take over Bikini Bottom, okay? There's your jellyfish theory, you could stop commenting about it. So, we have reached my final SpongeBob Mini Theory, and probably the final SpongeBob theory I will ever make. And it's fittingly the theory that I teased in the final episode of Don't Feed the Muse. I'm going to be proving that Larry the Lobster is secretly a drug lord kingpin that goes by the name Pinhead Larry. This is the Pinhead Larry the Lobster theory. I saved this one till the end, not because it's the best or the most shocking theory I've ever made. It might not even be the best mini theory in this video, but I saved it because it's the most ridiculous sounding one. And I think that's the thing that I love the most about making these videos. It's that you can come up with the most ridiculous, stupid ideas about the most mundane and unsuspecting topics, like a random side character in a kid's show, and then if you can still actually somehow make a pretty good case for it, it's just the most unexpected and magical feeling in the world. And it's why I have loved making a theory about a time-traveling ghost pirate or a Goofy Goober alien death cult. It's why I have loved making each one of these theories, and why I'll continue to make theories about other stupid, unsuspecting, mundane topics after this. It's been a wild ride. Let's begin our final SpongeBob theory. In the Season 2 episode, Survival of the Fittest, Sandy Sleep talks about fighting two infamous criminals named Dirty Dan and Pinhead Larry.
I've had enough of your dastardly deeds, Dirty Dan. I'm gonna get you and your partner, Pinhead Larry.
She later mistakes SpongeBob and Patrick for the criminal duo, and attacks and even buries them alive with their own gravestones. It's obviously an iconic episode, but I've always wondered who exactly were Dirty Dan and Pinhead Larry.
All right, Pinhead, your time is up.
Who you calling Pinhead?
Were they real people, or were they just someone Sandy made up? Are they legendary outlaws she heard about, or someone she actually fought from her past? It's a hard question to answer because they're really only mentioned in this one episode. The best we get later on is the words "Dirty Dan was here" written in graffiti on the back of a gym. Or that's at least what I thought, until I saw the season 11 episode, Shopping List, where SpongeBob and Sandy travel to a snowy mountain and we briefly see them pass by two graves labeled Dirty Dan and Pinhead Larry. So we know they were definitely real people. Now, in the episode, Sandy seems kind of familiar with this area, and these are the exact same graves she recreated for SpongeBob and Patrick. So this seems to be implying that her dream was actually based off of a real memory of her fighting and killing Dirty Dan and Pinhead Larry here. Except, there's one problem with that. How did Dirty Dan write this graffiti if he's supposed to be dead? I mean, I know it's not like we see when this graffiti was written, but it wasn't left on just any old random gym. It was written on the back of Larry the Lobster's gym. A gym that we saw Larry open in season 9.
What you see before you is the culmination of my lifelong dream, Larry's gym. Yeah!
Meaning this graffiti must have been written long after Sandy would have fought and killed Dirty Dan and Pinhead Larry. So, how is this possible? How could Dirty Dan write this on Larry's gym if he's supposed to be dead? I think this means that the real Dirty Dan and probably also Pinhead Larry are not actually dead. They probably fake their deaths and are alive somewhere in Bikini Bottom. But where, and more importantly, who are they? Wait a second. Why would Dirty Dan write that he was here at this specific gym? Larry's gym. You don't think Larry the Lobster could be Pinhead Larry? That sounds stupid. Or does it? I mean, it would explain why Dirty Dan would risk exposing that he's still alive at a place Sandy probably frequents. Maybe he's leaving a message for his former criminal partner. Okay, let's not get ahead of ourselves. So, they're both named Larry, and you definitely could say he has a pin-shaped head. But Larry is friends with Sandy, and he definitely isn't a criminal, right? Maybe we need to take a closer look at our lobster friend. So, I rewatched every single appearance of Larry the Lobster in all 14 seasons of SpongeBob, and here's what I learned. Larry cares a lot about staying in shape and working out, to an obsessive degree.
My latissimus dorsi has gone flabby. I've got to get to a rowing machine.
He also hates when anyone else is out of shape and will do anything in his power to help them get fit.
Those poor people. Someone needs to whip them into shape. Looking out at this sea of flaccid muscles and sagging flesh, frankly, I'm disgusted. Push it! Push it!
Apparently, he was also raised by these two old fish.
But you guys are way too old and unsightly for my beach.
So polite. Just like we raised him.
And to further confirm this, the same old lady fish later says this during the Alaskan bullworm incident.
We should call my nephew.
Sounds like she could definitely be referring to Larry here, so I do think they're supposed to be his aunt and uncle. We also know he loves protein shakes.
Protein shakes saved my life, bro.
He used to be a lifeguard, but recently fulfilled his lifelong dream of opening up a massive gym.
The culmination of my lifelong dream. A place of my own where I can work out every day, anytime I want.
He's not the most complex character, and there's definitely nothing here to indicate that he's the former infamous outlaw Pinhead Larry. Except for one teeny tiny detail in the season 12 episode, The Nitwitting. In this episode, we very briefly see Larry working out at his gym, but we can clearly see that he's drinking a kelp shake. And that wouldn't mean anything to you unless you remembered the season 4 episode, Best Frenemies. In this episode, a new restaurant opens up selling something called a kelp shake.
Ah, a new store on my block.
Everyone's enjoying a delicious kelp shake.
They pop up out of nowhere, and we never find out who was really running them. The kelp shakes have an initial bad taste, but they are extremely addictive.
Ah, this tastes like a wet gym sock. Hey, this ain't half bad. This is amazing.
Like, to the point where people basically get hooked on it like a drug.
Crabs, we're all out of juice.
Well, we gotta get more.
The Kelp Shake restaurant is later shut down, and the shakes are banned because apparently they have some kind of radioactive material in them.
What's happening to me?
It'll take decades to clean this hazardous material up.
I sure feel sorry for whoever drank this.
Larry mentions that the protein shakes saved his life.
You don't need that glop.
Oh, I wouldn't call it glop. Protein shakes saved my life, bro.
Like, what does that even mean? Okay, hear me out. What if this is how he survived his death? Sandy killed him and his partner, but the radioactive properties of the kelp shakes brought him back to life.
Protein shakes saved my life, bro.
So, of course, Larry would continue to drink and sell these kelp shakes. They literally saved his life. Even if they're radioactive and illegal, to him, this is a way to help himself and everyone around him become stronger, the thing we know he wants most of all. It explains why he gets so defensive when Squidward insults his protein shakes.
I love protein shakes.
Okay, but there's still an obvious issue here. If Sandy killed Pinhead Larry, why doesn't she recognize him now? Well, I think we get a possible explanation to this in the Camp Coral spin-off episode, Game Night, where the camp counselors play a board game called Lobster Trap. If you take away the beard and the eye patch, the lobster on the box looks exactly like Larry, a direct clue about Larry the Lobster being a criminal. Just like that Flying Dutchman game, I think this game is based on the real legendary criminal Pinhead Larry. This explains why Sandy wouldn't recognize Larry the Lobster. Either this is a criminal disguise he wore, or, and I'm just speculating here, it's actually what he used to look like and the healing properties of the kelp shake fixed his eye. And if you're still not convinced about Larry's criminal connections, I've saved my best evidence for last. Remember that old lady that raised Larry?
So polite. We should call my nephew.
She's just a sweet old lady. There's no way she would have raised a criminal mastermind, right? Well, in the season 9 episode, Patrick Man, she is revealed to be none other than the Dirty Bubble.
Oh, dear. The Dirty Bubble?
This random old lady was actually one of the most notorious criminals in Bikini Bottom all along. Man Ray's partner in crime, the Dirty Bubble.
Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy's arch nemesis, the Dirty Bubble.
And I know what you're thinking. Maybe this is just a disguise he wore in this one episode. It doesn't necessarily mean this old lady has always been the Dirty Bubble, but I checked everywhere, and I can confidently say that we have never seen the Dirty Bubble and this lady in the same scene. And she's a pretty common background character. Also, she lives in the same retirement home as the Dirty Bubble's nemesis, and we see her constantly in the background watching them. She is literally the perfect cover for the Dirty Bubble to spy on them. But most damning of all, this old lady is friends with and even went to high school with Man Ray.
Why, hello, Ray.
Mabel! I haven't seen you since high school.
Larry the Lobster was raised by the Dirty Bubble, explaining how he became the infamous criminal known as Pinhead Larry. And wait a second. Pinhead Larry was raised by the Dirty Bubble? The only criminal we know in the show whose entire gimmick is being dirty. Holy sh! The Dirty Bubble is Dirty Dan! It fits too perfectly. This would also explain how Dirty Dan faked his death. The Dirty Bubble is constantly being killed and later brought back to life with a bubble blower. The Dirty Bubble and Larry the Lobster were the infamous criminal duo Dirty Dan and Pinhead Larry. After nearly being killed by Sandy, they changed their identities and split up. The Dirty Bubble continuing his criminal pursuits with his new partner Man Ray, and Larry the Lobster choosing a more subtle approach by secretly selling illegal kelp shakes. And even though they've been apart for years now, the Dirty Bubble still left a little reminder to his old partner. Dirty Dan was here. Yes, he certainly was. And that is the Pinhead Larry the Lobster theory, and that is the end of Alex Bale's SpongeBob Conspiracies. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm done. That is every possible SpongeBob theory I can think of. I got no more. I have fully emptied my brain of every stupid SpongeBob thought I have ever come up with. There is no more reason to ask me for more, okay? Listen, I'm sure they will make more SpongeBob episodes and spin-offs and movies that will be full of new lore to theorize about, but I'll probably just let other theorists take it from here. So yeah, more theories on the way. I'll probably keep covering topics like SpongeBob that are nostalgic and unsuspecting. I guess I might as well announce some of the theories I'm working on. I'll be releasing a Blue's Clues theory and a High School Musical theory. There's just a lot to talk about with both of those. I'm really excited. I'm also working on a bunch of other theories too. I just don't want to reveal them yet. So go ahead and subscribe to catch those. I don't know when or what order I'll be posting those in. I might even post something else besides those two first. We'll see. Thank you for all the support on these SpongeBob videos. They really were a lot of fun to make, and they were just a really big part of my life for the past couple of years. And even though I've played this character that hates making SpongeBob theories, I've really appreciated all the love on those videos. You can check out my Patreon or merch if you want to support me. Patrons can get access to new videos early, sneak peeks behind the scenes, and their name at the end of the video. Thanks again. I will see you next time. No more SpongeBob. Bye!